All right. Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name's Tracy Craig. I'll be moderating tonight's meeting. First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming. This is the 12th community meeting to discuss environmental investigation and remediation work associated with the former Ford Aeronutronics project. I would just like to get a show of hands. How many people do we have here from Bay Ridge Park? Okay, so that's what I thought. We're doing active work there. And then how about from Belcourt Terrace? Okay, and then any other location? Okay. Okay, great, thank you. Thanks so much for coming. We have an in-person meeting tonight. We're also live streaming this, so same rules apply, what we always say. If you have a question, we're going to bring the microphone to you tonight, and we'd ask you to talk into the microphone so people that are watching this meeting virtually can hear your question and participate that way. So our agenda tonight, very short. We have a short presentation that we'll be giving you, followed by questions and answers. I would like to ask you to hold your questions, if you would, till the end of the meeting, and then we'll answer them there. If you can't remember what your question is when you came in, you should have been handed by Sarah a packet of information, including our presentation itself. There's some definitions and other important material. There's also one of these cards, so you can actually write your questions down on the cards. If it works out, Sarah can collect cards and I will read the questions out and have our panel answer them. If people want to speak into the microphone and ask their questions directly too, we have a small enough group here tonight that that's perfectly acceptable. So we'll be very flexible during the questions and answer period. We do have a panel tonight, so I'd like to introduce them. First of all, I think everybody knows Jessica Law, the project manager with the Santa Ana Regional Water Quality Control Board. And then next to Jessica is Amanda Palumbo. Amanda is with OEHA, which is the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. She's a toxicologist and can answer questions related to health. Next to that is Mike Barnes. I think everybody also knows Mike Barnes. He's the program manager for WSP, which is the environmental consultant that Ford has selected. And then next to him is Emily, and I think most people, at least in Bay Ridge Park, know Emily. She's been on the ground doing community outreach. She's also an engineer and is very intimately involved in the design and the construction of the soil vapor extraction system that's being constructed at Bay Ridge Park, which is almost done. I think it's wrapping up in about a month. So I think that is our panel. And then I want to also call attention over here to Ken Connor. Ken Connor is with WSP. He's an executive, and the buck stops there with WSP, so he's here tonight. And I don't believe Ken has ever missed one of these meetings either. So an important project to both Ford and WSP. And with that, I think I will turn this over to Jessica to give her presentation. And if you have a clarifying question during your presentation or her presentation, if you just raise your hand, I'll bring the microphone over to you and you can ask it in the microphone. Otherwise, as I said, we'll save questions for afterwards. Thanks.
All right. I say this every time. I move a lot when I'm talking, so I have a tendency to back away from the microphone. If folks are having a hard time hearing me, just give me a thumbs up. I will know that will mean to get closer to the microphone. So tonight's presentation I am going to again talk about just a brief recap, and I emphasize brief, same with the vapor intrusion overview, but I do want to make sure we're all kind of speaking the same language and understanding the purpose of why we're here tonight. Then I'll give an update of what's occurred since our last meeting. So this is going to cover information from July 1st of last year through December 31st. Then we'll give a update on the remediation progress, followed by the next steps and project schedules, and then we will jump into the Q&A session. So first, just to really quickly highlight, that green outlined area here, that is what Ford originally leased. It was about 200 acres in size, where they ended up operating. So they did not lease that entire property the entire time they operated, but it was about 98 acres in size It's this blue outlined area, now the One Ford Road community. But the former facility operated from 1957 to 1993. It was closed. Cleanup activities occurred on that property. It was those cleanup activities that got soil closure. Soil only, not groundwater, but soil closure, and that allowed the property to be rezoned from industrial use to residential use, and redevelopment occurred after that. Now, part of that soil closure, that was with the local oversight program, the regulatory agency at the time. When that closure happened, the case was then transferred to the Santa Ana Water Board for regulatory oversight because there was still the need to evaluate groundwater offsite and do additional cleanup activities there. So this is the same list of activities that I've shown in the past, but what I want to bring your attention to is this 2014. That's when the US EPA issued a memo regarding updated toxicity information regarding trichloroethene, or TCE, which is one of the site's contaminants of concern, and this potential for short-term exposure risks. As a result, the screening levels that we utilize are developed and updated by the San Francisco Bay Water Board. Same water board as us, but located up in the Bay Area. They update and keep together these environmental screening levels that we all across the different water boards utilize. So those were updated in 2016. 2017 occurred. The water board asked Ford to prepare a conceptual site model. And this is a report that looks at all of the site history, all of the data that's been collected, and it compares it to the current screening levels and industry standards. It was that document that identified some potential data gaps that needed to be investigated further. And one of those data gaps was the need to look at some old soil gas data and reevaluate that for that potential vapor intrusion risk. And then the vapor intrusion assessments began in 2018, and here we are today. So we've all also seen this figure. This is on vapor intrusion. It's just a general conceptual model. Here's a bunch of definitions that are for your reference later. But the big one with vapor intrusion is just the movement of chemicals in the vapor phase below ground into a building. And I want to point out that soil gas, contaminated soil gas comes from either soil contamination or contaminated groundwater. And so you have to have one of those for there to be that soil vapor plume and for there to be the potential for vapor intrusion. Now, the site's primary contaminants of concern, we've talked about it before, it's that TCE, but then also tetrachloroethene, which is PCE. So as the soil gas moves below the ground, it can come into buildings through cracks in the foundation or utilities that enter the building. Now, normal ventilation in a home can flush those chemicals out, but sometimes they can occur at levels, if there's not enough ventilation to flush it out, at concentrations that can pose a risk to human health. And so this is where we want to evaluate it and check to see if that's occurring. Now, one of the components that makes vapor intrusion evaluations tricky is that there's the potential for outdoor air sources like air pollution to get into homes, as well as indoor air sources. This can be cleaning products, or we've seen it with certain scented candles or hobby glues, dry cleaning. There's a number of things that can also introduce chemicals into indoor air, which is why when they do that indoor air sampling, the folks that show up do tend to ask a lot of questions. And then this slide I introduced at the last presentation, which just goes a little more into the vapor behavior and why we don't just take one sampling event and say, okay, we have all the information we need. Vapor behavior is really dynamic, especially the shallower those vapors are identified, the more they're influenced by both natural and man-made factors. So some of these natural factors can be wind, temperature, pressure, soil type, the soil moisture. Man-made effects can be the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system. That can cause changes to the building pressure. And a negative pressure in a building can end up drawing vapors inside. Same with a positive pressure can keep vapors down. Other things that can happen is heating. That can cause a stack effect. As that hot air rises, that can draw vapors in. And building conditions, so the age of the foundation and home, the foundation type and condition, and a number of other things all contribute to and can influence vapor intrusion. So just want to highlight these. And now, that recap, that's as brief as I can. I'm trying to reduce it even more each meeting. But now we can talk on what's happened since our last meeting. So when it comes to assessment and monitoring, we have three main things. First is the vapor intrusion assessment. Now, no new soil gas probes were installed from that July 1st to December 31st timeframe. We're getting really close to having a very good comprehensive understanding of the soil vapor plume. 234 soil gas probe locations were sampled, and at each probe location, there are 2 probe depths, so one at 5, one at 15 feet for most of these locations. So a lot of data being collected. 20 homes were sampled for that initial vapor intrusion evaluation. One home was offered air purifier, and no homes were added to the indoor air investigation area. Now, one new thing that we are implementing is some additional access outreach. We are recognizing that folks are moving in and out of the community, and in some cases also not everyone responded to those earlier access agreements. So there's some additional outreach that's going on. 172 access request letters did go out, and 63 residents did respond to those. And we have said it every meeting, if you're in the indoor air investigation area and your home has not been sampled, you are still welcome to get your home sampled. And we encourage it because all that data really helps to ensure the path forward for the project is protective of human health. And then for data gap assessment, there's some additional information we need regarding the contaminated groundwater. So 18 groundwater samples were collected from 3 locations, and they were collected at multiple depths below the ground surface. Groundwater in the area ranges between about 15 feet below the ground surface to 55. Just kind of depends on where you're at within that investigation area. And I want to point out this is groundwater. It's not your drinking water. That comes from and through the city, meets all state and federal requirements for drinking water quality. And then 6 groundwater monitoring wells were installed at 2 locations. And again, this is to evaluate groundwater at several different depths. And then lastly, for this part, is that long-term indoor air monitoring. Once the home has been evaluated in a couple seasons, these homes are moving into long-term indoor air monitoring. And they mailed out 7 letters to properties, and these letters include the frequency of when the home should be monitored, and it can range anywhere from every 6 months to once every 5 years. And that frequency is based on an evaluation of what the future risks. So we're looking at the soil gas and inputting some conservative assumptions to help assist with that frequency. And as part of the long-term indoor air monitoring, 38 homes were sampled. And those 38 homes, some of those do include homes that have the mitigation measures in them. And then here's just, wanted to highlight a couple photos. You guys are around, you see a lot of this stuff. The photo on the left is a soil gas probe installation, and they utilize what's called a direct push rig. This is a smaller footprint rig when they're only going 15 feet below the ground surface. This is a technology that is very viable. The photo on the right is the setup of the soil gas sampling. So those probes are located 5, 15, sometimes deeper feet below the ground surface. And there's tubing that runs to the surface that they connect to a pump that is able to draw those vapors out. It collects in this canister down here. And one of the things not shown in this photo, but I do want to mention, because we've had questions in the past of how do we know the data that's being collected is quality data and is not being manipulated in a way to look better for Ford. And one of those ways, there's a lot of checks and balances, and one of those data quality checks is what's called a leak check, and they have to maintain a certain amount of a leak check compound that is present when they do the sampling, and this helps provide that line of evidence that there's no ambient air influencing that sample. And then here, when they are drilling deeper, this is the type of drill rig you're going to see around. It is much bigger. This one is a sonic drill rig, and this is what is being utilized to collect some of those deeper groundwater grab samples. Next, as data is still getting collected, we're still evaluating risk. We want to make sure that the path forward remains protective of human health and the environment. So in the second half of last year, one addendum was submitted, and I just want to highlight this chart. I've shown it in past meetings. It just gives a depiction of some of the response actions that we would take based on those calculated risks. And it can range anywhere from cleanup to doing nothing. And it is a number of lines of evidence and factors that do go into those risk management decisions, but just wanted to highlight this again. And as a reminder, for the original risk assessment reports, we did have community outreach efforts to discuss those results, and those were recorded, and they are up on both the state GeoTracker database as well as Ford's information website for this project, if anyone wants to go back and look at that. So now we'll switch to remediation and mitigation. We're going to start with mitigation. And just as a refresher, mitigation is that engineered exposure control that decreases the amount of vapor entry. So when there's the air purifiers, those are cleaning up the indoor air once the vapors have passed through the foundation and gotten into indoor air. What has happened in Bay Ridge Park are subslab depressurization systems. And what this does is it redirects the vapors below the home by creating a slight vacuum, cleans it through some granular activated carbon, and then pipes it up to above the roof line. And 14 of those were installed within Bay Ridge Park. These did replace the air purifying units in the homes, and the effectiveness has been confirmed with some sampling rounds of indoor air. Indoor air sampling is going to continue twice a year. We want to have that analytical data that shows it's working as engineered. And then they also do the monthly checks on the exterior to make sure they're operating, doing some additional readings and so forth. Now, this photo highlights what that system looks like at Bay Ridge Park. This is bigger than what was originally shown and presented to everyone. And that's because after that initial pilot test, before they go in and implement something within an entire community, they're going to do a small scale version. And that small scale version identified some design tweaks that ended up having this be bigger. And so as a result, there was the visual impact that the community had expressed. And so Ford and WSP worked with the HOA and the residents, and they did design this system enclosure to help mitigate that visual impact. And then the photo on the left is a crew installing the SSD system, which is drilling through the footing, getting under the slab, and installing a horizontal pipe that can then be connected to a blower. It draws this vacuum and gets those vapors out.
Could I just follow up on that?
Yeah.
Do you mind?
Yeah.
While we're on that topic? Oh, I can be loud enough. So
No,
I do
we
have
have
an
it. Actually, we have people who've got it recorded because people can actually hear it.
So I had an SSD installed the last week of October, 1st of November, and the following week, your team came in and did the indoor air sampling.
but nobody's sampled since the first week of November. So I'm wondering, how do we know, is it effective? Air purifiers have been taken out of my home, et cetera.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so you are on a 6-month sampling schedule. There should have been a results letter sent to you that showed the results from pre-SSD installation and post-SSD installation that showed the effectiveness and the concentrations of before and after.
And we know that within 1 week of the installation of the SSD?
It's that effective.
Yes, it is that effective. It's almost instantaneous. Yeah. Yeah, and if for any reason you don't have it, Heidi can actually pull it up and show it too.
I probably do, but I have a lot of
I'm sure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but excellent question. But as Jessica indicated, the SSD systems are shown to be very effective.
And then your crew goes out monthly to collect. What are the readings that they collect to verify?
Sure. So they do a full operation and maintenance schedule on each of the systems where I don't know all of the details if people have specific questions about what they do in the operation and maintenance, but they basically test the system, confirm that it's operating, make sure that it's pulling enough pressure or enough vacuum from beneath the house. They check the carbon, they take samples of the effluent to make sure that that carbon hasn't reached its limit, because carbon can hold a certain amount of chemical, but then it gets what we call spent. And at that time, you have to replace the carbon. So far, we've done 1 carbon change out on all 14 units. We don't anticipate doing another carbon change out probably for another 3 or 4 months. That carbon that we have in there, based on the concentrations that are below the house, should last a while. One of the things that we did notice with the SSD systems is that those concentrations below the house dropped from, let's say, in the hundreds down to either non-detect or in the low teens very quickly. So overall, we were very pleased with the system. We had to do some tweaks and modifications based on noise. We had to turn some of the blowers up. There's 4 settings. There's a low, medium, high, and max. I think we have 1 or 2 operating on a medium setting or a high setting because we didn't get the vacuum that we wanted from the pressure from the soil vapor probes that are inside the house that measure that vacuum. So, but overall, they're shown to be very effective.
All right. And then again, right now the SSD systems are within Bay Ridge Park. And so this is that figure I showed at the beginning. I'm going to be bouncing and showing this figure a few times throughout. So next update would be that monitored natural attenuation. And this is the remediation that relies on the naturally occurring reduction of the contamination. This is the preferred and approved approach for areas that have lower impacts to groundwater and soil vapor. When this is the approach that we still need to verify that these concentrations are decreasing over time with routine monitoring. And not everywhere had a sufficient number of monitoring points to help demonstrate that. So the Water Board did require some additional monitoring points, and this photo here is just showing the well installation activities. That has that large footprint while the well is being installed, but once the well is in the ground, there is a flush-mounted traffic-rated well box that is what is accessed to collect those groundwater samples a handful times each year. And for that monitored natural attenuation, I've just highlighted these areas on this figure. So the One Ford Road community has monitored natural attenuation for soil gas. So does the area directly to the south, and then north of Bison Road. And that, again, is because of the soil gas concentrations that we've seen, coupled with, are we seeing any vapor intrusion or not? And just as that reminder, You're going to see monitored natural attenuation for the One Ford Road community, also for groundwater, and that's because they had undergone a significant amount of cleanup back in the 90s, and the effectiveness of that cleanup has been supported with the new data, and why a lot of these sampling probes, whether it's soil gas probes or groundwater monitoring wells, have been strategically placed looking at that historical data to make sure if anything remained, that the areas being sampled would identify that. And then next is the soil vapor extraction system. So these are going into the two communities, Bay Ridge Park, Belcourt Terrace, and I have those highlighted here. And this has been that big step. This is what we've kind of built up over the years to get to this point. We have all the data that suggested and warrants this active cleanup. So in Bay Ridge Park, construction started in November of last year. And for this update, I did bring it through current because I think it's really important to also mention the milestone that Belcourt Terrace is also in the construction phase. They just started last month. And so here's a photo, and I just want to go through a few of these photos of the construction activities, so that way folks that are maybe outside of Bay Ridge Park can get an idea of what's going on. Now, here's part of the soil vapor extraction system installation. On this photo here is the wells being installed. And each well needs to be connected to conveyance piping that ultimately will run to the extraction building itself to extract out these vapors. So each day there's open trenches, but then at the end of the day, they are covered with trench plates. Now, it has come to my attention, as well as WSP, a couple of weeks ago, that there's been some safety incidences, which include up to somebody tripping and falling. And so there have been multiple actions taken that I'm aware of. WSP can talk on this further during the Q&A, but just wanted to mention this, that we are aware of this. There are measures being taken anywhere from trying to highlight the edges of these trench plates with fluorescent paint to make them more visible. But I do want to encourage folks that if you have any suggestions on how to address these safety concerns, to please bring them up. We invite your feedback and really do appreciate your patience. I know that the construction activities have been it's in your front yard of your homes, and it's invasive, and we hear that, and so we really appreciate the patience that everyone has shown to all of the field staff, and also welcoming your feedback when something's not working for you. I know that's why they have Emily out there to hear, so that these issues can be addressed right away. And then for Bay Ridge Park, we're in the home stretch. It's the last month. So I want to just really emphasize, please take extra precautions and really be aware of your surroundings. But there's going to be some additional measures that WSP and Ford and Craig Communications are working on to try and address all these safety concerns. And then some more photos of the system installation. Here is some of the equipment used to dig the trenches. That would be the photo on the left. The photo on the right shows what these well boxes for the soil vapor extraction well look like. They need to be connected to a larger well box than just your typical monitoring well, because they need to be able to access the various instrumentations within that. And then another photo would be they conduct pressure testing of these extraction lines. The last thing we want is to backfill all the trenches, turn that system on, and it not work effectively. That would be incredibly disappointing and very disruptive to everyone. So this is one of the steps that is taken along the way to make sure when that system turns on, it works as intended. And then lastly, for the soil vapor extraction systems are the two renderings of what these buildings are going to look like. So the top one is a rendering for Bay Ridge Park. While the building looks like it is attached to one of the units, it is not. It does have a 3-foot separation. And then the one on the bottom is for Belcourt Terrace. And there was a lot of, my understanding, and WSP can talk on this, but when it came to the design and all of that of these compounds, because this is what is going to house the blower, which is what creates the vacuum and all of the electrical components and the vessels that clean the vapors that are being extracted before releasing them to the atmosphere and creating noise reduction to meet city requirements of that 50 decibels. So WSP and Ford worked with the HOAs to make sure they met all of their visual requirements for these remediation systems. And then we have two areas where for cleanup, it still needs to be determined. We need to collect a little bit of data. So that data gap work where there's some additional groundwater grab samples being collected, some additional monitoring wells going in place. Those are being used so that we can determine the most appropriate path forward for this project that will ultimately get this site as an entirety closed, because that's everyone's goal here. But we want to make sure it's done correctly and completely. So these are just the two areas where we quite haven't determined what the cleanup approach is yet, but that'll be coming in the future. And then I've shown this figure before. I only have it in here because we were kind of, I don't want to say stuck, but we were in this remedial design section for a while. There was the permitting complexities that were all necessary. It just took longer than anticipated. And so now we have shifted over. We're in the remedy implementation. The systems are being installed, and then they can get turned on, operated, things cleaned up, shown with some data, and be done. For what's next, so Bay Ridge Park, next month, they are wrapping up the installation activities, and I heard April 19th, there will be no more trench plates. So.
Earlier than that.
Earlier than that, so.
The week of March 18th, there'll be no more trench plates. We'll be done with our trenching. This still isn't.
Ooh.
So
like this.
yeah,
Okay.
so trenching in Bay Ridge Park will be completed by the end of next week. And so the only activity that will be taking place is actually related to where the treatment building is. And we have tentatively on our schedule for the delivery of that treatment building, which is a prefabricated building, to arrive in early April. So they'll bring the building in and they'll raise it on a crane from Country Club Drive and set it on the foundation that's been poured. And then the only other thing that we are waiting for is the electrical connection from SoCal Edison. And for those that may not know, that electrical connection is coming all the way from Belcourt Master through Belcourt Terrace, underneath Country Club Drive, and then daylighting there at the treatment building. So they'll have to conduct that. There is some talk about bringing a generator in once we get the system installed to run some tests while we're waiting for SCE to finish the final power connection, but that's still in the works. But as Jessica indicated, we are going to be out of there with the trenching by the end of next week. There is, as most of you are aware, a re-asphalting or grading and re-asphalting project where the entire HOA is having 2 inches of the asphalt removed, and you all are getting a brand new road. And so that, right now, we're working with our contractor and the HOA to determine when that's going to be. But right now, we tentatively have that on the schedule to start April 8th. And our contractor, who has done the work in this HOA before, is confident that they can do this in about 3 to 5 days. And we'll break it up into 3 different phases. So more information to follow on the grading and repaving. And that'll come in the form of a notice of work, as well as email notification, and possibly at a mail delivery. So more information to follow on that.
Thank you. And just to add on, there was the comment about the kind of lengthy area to get electricity. And this is what Southern California Edison identified as the only one in the vicinity that was viable to power this remediation system. So because of that, that's why that location was selected. And this was based on the Southern California Edison contact in person who is, are they the construction manager for that installation and that power drop. Correct. And so then Belcourt Terrace construction, that started last month. This should go through June, and we are anticipating startup of both systems this summer. Things that can and have the potential to delay the schedule, of course, is weather, and then still that power drop construction. It's a third party, it's Southern California Edison. I know WSP has been working really closely with them, but that's still one of the moving parts that has the potential to delay items.
But in this last week, we have made excellent progress with SoCal Edison. We really had no control over them, but we have made significant progress. They have provided us everything we need to start constructing the transformer pad, which is ultimately the power source. So that puts us ahead of schedule. We're actually ahead of schedule on just about everything related to the project.
Excellent.
Yes. Yeah, I don't want to throw them under the bus, but yeah.
That's why
it was very challenging getting them
Mike,
to...
can you repeat that question just for...
Sure. So
Thank
the
you.
question was, is SoCal Edison responsible for some of the delays to actually get power to the system? And the answer is yes. Yeah.
And then I only have a couple more slides, which is the what's next. And I've shown these in the past. They don't change because monitoring is ongoing until we get until the case is closed. And so there are some additional groundwater monitoring wells going in to address some data gaps. And then there was the risk assessment work. As new data comes in, that new data is getting still evaluated. This is a active case. We're not going to take old data and just rely on that. If something new comes in and we need to change directions, we will do that. It will, of course, be data driven, but we don't want to come back in 10 years and say, oh, we should have done this. If we have the data now that warrants going left or right, we want it to be data driven and make sense. And then still those indoor air sampling with the additional access efforts. If we get new data, we want to incorporate it into our risk management decisions. And then with remediation, these systems are getting installed. There will be ongoing monitoring for that. And then when those systems are done operating, there will be ongoing monitoring after to make sure they cleaned up as designed and intended. And so just the regular kind of summary. We're still doing the monitoring activities. There's going to be the remediation activities. We still want to test indoor air. It's still a really important line of evidence that is necessary, so really encourage folks to participate in that. And then we continue with the community outreach, whether it's these larger community meetings that we hold twice a year or smaller community-specific ones based on the needs for what is going on. So like Bay Ridge Park and Belcourt Terrace have a lot more communication because they have remediation systems going in, and there's a lot more details that are relevant to their community that need to be communicated. So for more information, there's the GeoTracker website. The Water Boards has an email notification list. It was formerly LIRIS list, now it's Gov Delivery. I typically will use this to send out when our next public meeting is. There is the webpage on the Santa Ana Water Board's webpage regarding this project, and then Ford has their site-specific website as well as the 800 number. And then here at the local library is where all the reports go for those that like to view paper. So those are inputted there, and we can go to this.
Jessica, can I add one thing? I just want to introduce Heidi Dietrich Ferrando from WSP, and this dovetails off of what Jessica mentioned. If you're unsure whether or not your property is eligible for indoor air sampling, or you have a question about a results letter that you may or may not have received, anything related to indoor air sampling or where your property falls, please walk over and talk to Heidi. She has a computer that's connected to our database. She can bring up your address and tell you exactly where you fall in the program. We've noticed with Jessica indicated earlier, we went through a due diligence process where we reached out to properties that have been non-communicative over about 2 years, and we basically reintroduced ourselves, identified areas and properties that had sold. There might be new tenants, and we provided them an opportunity to participate in the indoor air program. We encourage people to participate in the indoor air program. The more data we have, the better we understand the contamination plume and the effects it may have on people. So again, Heidi is in the corner over there. She's willing to look up your address and talk about specifics related to your property.
And then I'll add that for those that are viewing online, you can type in your address to ask that question, and those that are manning the Q&A for the live stream can ask Heidi and get a response this evening as well.
And I will admit that the results letters can be confusing at times. There's a lot of information in there, but I think over the past 8 years, I've gotten pretty good of drawing people's attention to what to look at as far as what the results mean. And it's basically an embedded table within the results letter, and also what the next steps are. So I'd be happy to walk through that and explain that to you.
There we go. Okay, we're going to open this up for questions and answers. Just one thing I'd like to call attention to. There, if you want more information, you can go to the resources in the fact sheet. Ford's website is there, as well as GeoTracker. This presentation will be up on Ford's website and GeoTracker tomorrow if it isn't already, and then there'll be a link to this meeting. So if you want to rewatch it for some reason, you're certainly welcome to do that. So I'm going to open this up for questions and answers. First, I just want to know, there's a couple people with sun in their eyes. If you'd like to move up, please feel free. Did anybody fill out a card besides this one person? No. Okay, then I'm going to number you off. And Perry, I do see you, but this gentleman's had his hand up for half the presentation. And I'm going to remind you, Sarah's going to bring the microphone to you. So before I do that, let me just see who wants to have comment. Can you raise your hand if you'd like to comment? Okay, so one over there. Perry, you're next. The woman in the black turtleneck. And the gentleman in the black shirt. Okay, black is the color tonight. And then, of course, Nancy. All right.
The infamous Nancy. Thank you. I have a kind of a two-part question. I was struck by one of your slides that mentioned that you were still considering 2 areas of remediation that you had not yet addressed or are going to figure out how to address, which raises in my mind a question. I live in Belcourt Park, which is ostensibly not part of the immediate remediation project.
Isn't that right there?
It's the little circle within Belcourt Master.
Yeah, right where the cursor
Yeah.
is, up there.
Okay, so having seen this slide, and now you are circling 2 areas that have not yet been addressed, may I don't want to infer, but should I think that perhaps you will be discovering or looking or investigating in some of these other areas within the boundary or not?
So no, the investigation for the most part has fully delineated the soil vapor plume. So if you're in the indoor air investigation, you have been notified, especially with this reissuance of the access letters. And then there are already a number of groundwater monitoring wells that exist that also have clearly identified and delineated where the groundwater, impacted groundwater is. And it's these 2 areas where, through some of the earlier investigation efforts, both with soil gas and groundwater collection, that we identified some additional impacted groundwater that warranted some more sampling and data collection before jumping into a cleanup approach for those areas.
Okay, so is Belcourt Park somewhat?
Belcourt Park is good. It's on the
Okay.
outside.
Then my just a quick follow-up. The pad that you're talking about for the SCE power grid, is that going to be a sheltered, or is that simply a pad with a piece of equipment on it, or is that going to be architecturally set up, or what's it going to look like, I guess is what I'm really asking.
So we've already started the construction, so you could go by and look at it. There's going to be a retaining wall around it, and then there'll be 2 pads with equipment. One will have a transformer, and one will have a distribution board. And then we're going to do a lot of landscaping, mature landscaping in front of and on the sides, so it'll blend in with what's already there.
And this is near the Bison Gate going into Belcourt?
Yeah.
Okay.
And just so people are aware, we're talking about the entrance to Belcourt, what we call Belcourt Master on Belcourt Drive, and this is the power transformer pad that feeds the 2 treatment buildings. So they're 3 separate things. And if I could just add, specific to your HOA area, in addition to groundwater monitoring wells that monitor groundwater concentrations of the chemicals of concern, there's also soil gas probes that measure, that we sample regularly in your area, so that if conditions change, we're aware of that, and it's been quite stable. So we're very confident that the soil gas plume within that area has been defined, and I would be very surprised if conditions changed in that area. Yep.
Jessica, are you happy with the progress? Is your agency happy with where we stand now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right, good to hear.
I mean, this project has moved forward for the size of it. The amount of work that has occurred in the last 6 years is the fastest work that I have seen.
Wow.
And I have about 25 cases that I oversee, and so there's a lot of work that happens here, and it's happened very quickly, but it's in that quickness, it has all been data-driven with multiple lines of evidence to make sure that the path forward is appropriate, that we don't end up 10 years down the road looking back saying something got missed or we didn't do the right thing.
Okay, that's good to hear. Thank you.
If I could just piggyback on that, this isn't always the case where you have a regulatory agency, a responsible party, and a consultant that all get along. But we do. We have a very, what I would consider a team. We have a client that's very receptive to the requests of the water board. We have a water board that's very responsive and reasonable. I consider Jessica to be firm but fair. And we have a consultant that is large enough to act quickly, and a client that will pay for it quickly. So.
Okay, thank you. I do have a number of questions, so I'll try to stop. Emily, I saw you the other day, and I asked you why there are so many colors on the Hillsdale Street. As an example, I don't live in that swath from 65 to 89 where all the digging is going on, and there's like half a dozen or 10 different colors, yellow, purple, red, green. In front of my house, there's a big red dot. I have no idea why that red dot is there, but one of the things I asked was that you publish something so that we know what those colors are intended for. Is that something that you can share with us in the future?
So those colors that are over on your side of the property aren't for anything. So we delineate for the utility companies to come out and show us where the utilities are on their maps, and so that's what all those markings are. The different utilities all have their own colors. So it's gas and electrical and water, all of those are marked out, and we painted in the other areas to show like these are where you need to mark, and then some of the utilities just mark the entire neighborhood. So
Do you know what the big red dot means in front of my house?
that means there's electrical underground there.
I actually think it's so everybody knows where Perry lives.
Well, that's what I was thinking, right. Ha ha.
Well, we can. Well, we're going to be repaving or resurfacing the whole street, but anything that's on the sidewalks, yeah, we can come through and power wash that.
They'll power wash it, but they have to stay there until we're done excavating.
And I was going to add, it's a requirement from the USA Dig Alert. Anytime you break ground, you're supposed to call 1-800-DIG-ALERT to notify, and then that sends out a blast to all the utilities to come out and mark. So the yellow is gas, red's electrical, purple is your non-potable water.
It would be nice if we had a template, if the homeowners who live there had a template.
You know what? I think probably WSP can, you just go to the USA Dig Alert sign and there is a list. I used to have a little pocket
Red,
that indicated the colors just for ease, right?
red's electrical, yellow is gas, green is comm.
Maybe in the, and I'll give this one to Tracy, in the email updates that go out.
We can put
To
those
add an
colors.
attachment.
Absolutely. I'm just going to say it's a safety issue that you need to correctly identify what's underground so that you don't dig and hit it.
And another safety precaution that WSP does is we hire a third-party geophysical survey company to come out to basically truth the markings that are done by the companies.
That
They do
company
their own
didn't
work.
mark anything on that side where you live.
Yeah.
I've never seen them. Okay, I've never seen them drill down around the swimming pool. At Hillsdale, there's a swimming pool in the middle of the complex. I've never seen anybody drill around the pool. The solvent is flowing from Bay Ridge down, it's flowing from Jamboree down toward MacArthur. And it seems to me, since the concentration is up there along that 65 to 89 swath, if the solvent is continuing to flow down toward MacArthur, it's got to hit the pool area. And I wonder, has that been tested?
Yeah.
And what's the exposure, if any?
Yeah.
We actually have a couple, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, that was one of, with the cleanup design, and even before, was placing a couple very strategically placed soil vapor probes in that center area where the pool is. And because of access issues, originally the soil vapor extraction system designed included some extraction wells in that area, but from a design logistic, it wasn't going to be favorable for a number of reasons. So there's these monitoring points that are there that WSP and Ford need to show and establish to the water board that the system is achieving the radius of influence, and adding additional points if necessary to make sure that that area is getting addressed.
And I can show you where those are. They're on one of the figures over here if you want, Perry.
Okay. Oh, come on. Come on. Okay, I'll take one more, then I'll stop for a while. But I will be back. Okay.
Guaranteed.
I've driven down Belcourt Drive, and they had a plow in there, and they plowed up that area where they're going to put in the electrical building. If you look at that space where they created a 6-foot wall toward the back, there's a lot of roots. And if you go up the hill from where they were digging, there's a number of very tall pine trees. Several of them are leaning over the street. And my concern is, if we mess with the roots of those pine trees, have we increased the probability that those trees might come down because they're already top heavy? I don't know the extent of roots that were taken out, but if you stand there and look, you can see where they cut roots, and I want to know if those trees should be either topped or taken down.
Yeah, so we had extensive conversations about that internally and with arborists, and they said anything with less than a 4-inch diameter root is okay. It won't affect the life of the tree. So we watched really carefully while we were digging that hillside, and we didn't come across anything more than like 1.5 inches. So yeah, the trees are safe.
And if for any reason the tree is compromised, needs to be removed, we would replace it once everything's ripped out.
Okay. I'm going to move on, and Perry, you can absolutely ask more questions after we let other people have a chance to talk. So the lady in the black turtleneck, please.
Thank you.
Of course.
Mike, thank you for answering my email so promptly yesterday. I appreciate it. Okay. I have 2 quick questions, and they deal with some of the matters I brought up. One thing we've been told from the very beginning is the trenching, the pipes, the plates. This has been done hundreds and hundreds of times, different projects, residential. My question is, why was there not some kind of protocol already in place for safety purposes, which we've talked about, where that fluorescent outline of the plates was done just as a matter protocols from the beginning. Because we've, you know, because we've made such a lot of efforts about where the placement, because this is a temporary, where we are right now, it is temporary, but the installation of that unit at 94 Hartford will be more long-term. But for the safety, that's one of the reasons that I didn't, you know, like call you or anyone on site, kind of just, you know, giving everyone the benefit of the doubt, realizing we were going to be going through some times. But it just occurred to me after, you know, we went back and forth yesterday that that protocol should have been in place, and I'm sure moving ahead it will be.
Sure. Yeah, and I appreciate your feedback on that and your email last night. One of the things with these trench plates is we rely heavily on our contractor, which is E&E Construction, and they are a contractor that specializes in this type of construction and laying of these trench plates. This isn't something that they normally did, and so we followed basically standard procedure for laying trench plates. The incident that occurred where a woman had tripped on a trench plate was isolated. It was one trench plate kind of in the middle of the road that was covering a pothole. And so when we looked at that and trying to determine a corrective measure related to that, we said, yeah, that's one isolated trench plate, whereas in front of your property and along 94, it's a little bit more visual. Mm-hmm. You know, it's there, it's present. Doesn't mean it shouldn't have been spray painted or highlighted. One of the things that I would have loved to do if we had more room is actually just cone off the entire area so that you wouldn't even be able to walk over the trench plates. But we're working in a very tight area. They're right in front of the garages, so we couldn't do that. So to answer your question, quite frankly, we should have. We should have done that to begin with. We acted, we implemented a corrective measure. Fortunately, we have the trench plates out of that area now. We have a few trench plates around the edge, but to answer your question, we identified the issue, implemented a corrective measure, lesson learned, and we're taking that over to Belcourt Terrace.
Okay. And I'll say a lot of times what happens with, you know, each safety incident creates that lesson learned, and it carries over to next jobs. And so if the subcontractor hadn't experienced that situation, it wouldn't be necessarily at their forefront. But I know while we don't dictate their health and safety measures on all future projects that may be in residential communities, just as observations, those are some of the things that we'll pass along, and I'll share with like my colleagues of, hey, when you know you've got cleanup on one of your sites that's going into residential communities, be aware of some of these things and make these recommendations to your consultants and RPs. So
yeah, and if I can just add on, I mean, this is an important topic, so I want to spend a little bit of time to talk about it. We're working in a, you know, I told somebody the other day, I just wish sometimes I had a project on a brownfield. For those that don't know, a brownfield is just a vacant lot, right, where you can come in and install an SVE system and there's nothing really around. We are working in really tight space within Bay Ridge Park. Belcourt Terrace has a lot more room. The trenches are farther away from the garages. It is a very challenging construction project, and I understand everybody's frustration. I understand the disturbance, I understand the dirt, the noise, all of that. But at the end of the day, this is a very extensive and large construction project, which requires a large amount of dirt to be moved, a large amount of asphalt to be removed, and which requires a lot of manpower and heavy equipment. Some of the things that we did to try to prepare the community, and you're all well aware of them, is we had the pre-construction meeting where we sat around the pool, we showed everybody what to expect. We sent out a detailed notice of work that showed pictures of what to expect. It showed a phased approach of when these things would occur. We implemented weekly construction emails, which show where, what work has been done that week, included a 2-week look ahead of what you could expect, along with figures kind of showing you where things were going to happen. And for properties that had extensive work being done directly in front of them, we were sending weekly emails and then following with 48-hour and 24-hour phone calls. With that said, things change with construction, and it's a moving target at times. So we may have missed a few communications here and there, but for the most part, we implemented those communications procedures, which we consider robust, and I think Tracy would consider this a robust
Yeah,
community
I would
outreach.
just say the one thing that is you also had somebody on site to resolve problems in real time. But I'm going to keep moving us along because I know you had a second part to that question. I do want to note, though, that moving forward, those will be clearly delineated, and we'll also be adding signage for people, just so they're aware.
Second question, also dealing with our going back and forth yesterday, is the two mature pines that were removed at 94 Hartford to make room for the housing unit. You mentioned that when the project is completely finished, they will be replaced, but the size of the specimen and the type would be at the discretion of the board of directors, the HOA. Who would be financially responsible for those?
We would. Ford Motor Company will pay for the trees. Yeah, and I would think, and I can't speak on behalf of the HOA, but I think the HOA would garner feedback from the community, specifically those people that live on that side. I have heard that the pine trees aren't maybe the most desirable types of trees to have back there. I don't know. Some people like the pine trees, some people don't. You like them, Leslie?
That's what makes the place beautiful.
You like the pine trees?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I have another question after.
Sure, for sure.
Okay, well,
Does that
wait,
answer you?
Actually, I'm going to keep us. We're calling people in order.
Yeah, that's fine. So does that answer your question enough, Lee? Okay.
So I think the gentleman in the back, and then I have somebody that handed me a couple of questions that quite a time ago, and then Leslie, I'd like to give it to you if that's okay. Thank you.
Where's it?
And Nancy, of course. Nancy, sorry.
Thank you for the discussion, largely based upon process. My question is really more of, at the end of all this, what does it mean to us as homeowners in the delineated area? And maybe to give you some guidance in terms of what I'm looking for is, it's kind of helpful for me, as we talk to other neighbors and friends, to kind of understand kind of the level of risk. And I'll say Palestine, Ohio is a 10. Where would you kind of put kind of where we're at today versus a year and a half from now after you've completed the remediation and theoretically we're in the post-monitoring stage?
I don't know. There's a lot of us that can answer that. So
I'm going to leave it. I'm going to put Amanda to first talk on the risk component from a toxicologist kind of viewpoint.
So in terms of the health risk, I mean, I've seen a lot of homes that have non-detect concentrations in the indoor air, and so if that's where you are, the cancer risks would be below the 1 in a million threshold, which EPA says is insignificant. So I think you're at like a 0 compared to East Palestine.
But what about the homes where there's vapor intrusion occurring and why we're doing that work? How would you rate? That one's harder. It's just that's a tricky one to kind of put, I think, a number on it. But what I can say from the regulatory perspective is there is vapor intrusion occurring in homes. It increases cancer risk and non-cancer health effects. And from that, as the regulator, we are charged with protection of human health and the environment. So we want to address that and make these homes all be zeros. We've got a number of homes that are in that zero range of they're safe, there's no vapor intrusion occurring. And then we have these handful of homes, roughly 30, that have currently been identified that do. And we want all 30 of those homes to not have vapor intrusion occurring because that is what is acceptable to the water board.
Right. So it sounds like that's kind of the worst factor.
Yeah.
Having said that, then, if I understand your slides correctly, in approximately a year and a half, you hope or expect to get to that level of threshold. Is that correct?
Yep.
I mean, nothing's guaranteed. I appreciate it.
Right. And so it'll be the data that's collected during the operation of that soil vapor extraction system. There is a list of monitoring requirements and various lines of evidence that Ford and WSP needs to provide to the water board to show that it worked effectively and that it addressed it. Same with those subslab depressurization systems. We weren't going to say, yeah, you can remove air purifiers without showing they actually worked. And it's going to be the same once those systems are off, ongoing indoor air monitoring to show that below the ground the concentrations haven't increased and in indoor air those concentrations haven't come back.
And if I can just add onto the effectiveness of the SVE, the safety of the SVE, will we be continuing to monitor to ensure that the SVE system is operating in a safe way?
Okay. Sarah, Nancy?
You covered actually between Lee's comments and you responding to her and Jessica, my concerns were related to safety. I'm just going to add to that conversation that there wasn't just one trip and fall where the lady hit her head and the paramedics took her to the hospital. There's been multiple trip and falls and a paramedics truck that got stuck in a trench and multiple issues. And it's really surprising that it took until February to put your fluorescent paint anywhere. I was told by your staff that the trench plates were rented and they didn't want to mark them up, and it took Sylvia's fall to prompt something to happen.
Good. So to respond to that, Sylvia's fall is the only fall that I was aware of, that we were made aware of until last night. The other two falls just came to our attention last night, and the purpose of having an on-site community liaison is so that we can address those things real time. I could only hope that somebody would have notified us then, because when Sylvia fell, I mean, we were there. I mean, you were there. You know, I was on the phone with her husband within 10 or 15 minutes. I checked in with him at the hospital. I checked in with him the next morning. As soon as I got off the phone with him that night, I called my supervisor, Ken Connor. I called my client, woke him up in Michigan, and started a whole procedure within WSP where we have basically a stand-down procedure. We have to complete an incident report. We have a number of things in place that go through that. So I wish I would have known about the other incidents, but I was just informed of them last night. And so it's unfortunate.
Okay, so you know it took 2 weeks before they painted all of those plates after the fall.
Yeah.
It seems like you would have, I mean, you guys are all big companies and you'd have risk management teams and they'd come out before all of this and figure these things out. And if not, after a fall such as hers, 2 weeks is a long time to keep a community at risk.
Agreed.
Okay. And I will say that.
Please, one last thing regarding
Sure, of course.
safety. I don't know any names, but I think, Emily, I told you this before you went on vacation. There's a couple of your subcontractors in the heavy equipment, backhoe maybe, I don't know what those pieces of equipment, that speed through the neighborhood. And while they're on their equipment or on their cell phones, not safe.
Okay.
Yeah, the speed is a problem.
And I first of all, I want to say thank you for telling us,
Yeah.
right? Thank you. That's why we're having this meeting.
Yeah,
Got it. Okay.
I talked to them about it during the safety meetings, and I'll continue to talk to. Yeah.
But I do want to acknowledge this. You've talked with them, but it continues. So I think that's the point that Nancy wants to make, that we need to be maybe more effective in the communications with the subcontractors to make sure that I heard speeding, and then I think you said smoking and cell phones as well. So I just want to acknowledge that and say that that will be addressed.
Yeah. And
Mike, that will be addressed. I'm
Yes,
giving
definitely.
that task to you, and then
Well, we are addressing constantly, and I just also want to mention, like, Nancy and I talk all the time. And so I appreciate the feedback, and as Jessica encouraged everyone, I might not be able to tell you yes, I might not be able to solve the problem right there, but I am here to listen. I am willing to take feedback. Following Sylvia's event and a few other things, we actually had a complete stand-down meeting where we pulled all the subcontractors. Ken and I flew down here with E&E's CEO, their construction manager, and everybody, and we stood at Starbucks for about an hour with about 25 people trying to impress upon them the need for safety on this project. So, but again, sounds like certain things are continuing, the smoking, the speeding, we've heard cursing at some times.
Sounds like another
Okay.
call to the CEO.
All right,
or
I
whoever
think
was
we've made the
spoke.
point, and I'm going to move us on, right?
That's fine with me.
We got it, and I will make sure that we follow up on that completely. I have these questions, and whoever that person is, I'm going to read them now because you're incredibly patient. And then I know we have Leslie up, and then there's a woman back here with a gray sweatshirt, I believe. So those are our next two. Are you planning to do more drilling at Sea Island?
There's none that's been proposed or planned at this time.
Yep.
Okay. What
But
are the
if I could
results?
just add to that, we are drilling right outside of Sea Island on Ford Road and across the street in Belcourt Hill.
Okay, well, maybe this will answer the question. What are the results from the Sea Island testing, which was done last fall? I probably should have read that one first, forgive me.
Oh, talking about groundwater testing? Do you wanna answer that,
It would
Tracy?
probably be groundwater testing, and that's some of that additional, more data needs to be collected, and that's what is being done in Belcourt Hill and along Ford Road and even on Jamboree. And it's to collect, and Turnberry, to get some of this additional information that is necessary to determine those next steps. But it is, some of the groundwater samples that were collected within Sea Island helped to delineate, meaning we know that the concentrations were lower or even non-detect in certain areas, and that's what we wanted, because that all goes into the decisions on what those next steps are.
And I'd be happy to point out on one of the figures kind of where we're talking about and where we're seeing that contamination to give you a little visual.
Okay, so if the person that has questions about Sea Island wants more specific information, Mike is available after the meeting to talk with you and point out the specifics. There's one more question here, and that is, what criteria are you using to determine which development should receive new asphalt at Ford's expense? Sea Island asphalt has been significantly affected by Ford's destructive installation of monitoring equipment. So it's been affected by installation of some equipment.
Yeah, so I met with Sea Island HOA representatives. I went over their concerns. I brought their concerns back to Ford. Their stance was that the equipment we had created extensive damage to the asphalt. Our area, and they wanted us to re-asphalt the entire HOA. Our take on the situation was that we had a handful of soil gas probes, vertical soil gas probes with a flush-mounted well lid, as well as some groundwater monitoring wells, and that their request was somewhat unreasonable, and Ford denied their request to re-asphalt their HOA.
Okay.
It's not my decision.
Okay. I am going to, that was our last question there, so will you please, I think Leslie is up next, and she's been waiting patiently.
Okay, I have a million comments and questions, but I'll just address some of the more urgent ones. First of all, I just fell last week, and it was after, supposedly you had marked them. In the evenings and mornings, it's very slick, and I stumbled on almost like a pothole with gravel and everything, and then I fell, and a fellow did, drive by and help me, so he can verify it. Dropped all my groceries. Well, that's like $50 worth of stuff. And then anyway, I've been putting up with the noise.
Leslie, I just want to stop you. I just want that learning moment for everybody, right? So I just
Okay.
want to be clear. If you have a problem, please contact Emily or Mike
Right.
in real time. I mean, there's nothing like resolving it right there. I know sometimes it might be you think I'm okay, I'm a little embarrassed, whatever.
No, I wasn't embarrassed.
Okay, good. So that is exactly why they're there, is to help resolve things in real time. So
I know, okay.
And so I'm just saying, whether you want to or not, just if you do, we really encourage that immediacy, because that's why we set this up. Now,
But,
next question.
From future or previous encounters, we haven't got a lot of,
Okay, so
Anyway, my main concern is that the fire lane, it's all dirt, it's gravel, it's dust. I'm getting all the dust that they're drilling for the installation of the SVE. It's all up on my deck. Everything is just filthy.
Okay.
I've got tar, everything, and I'm wondering when they're going to repair that.
Yep, I can speak on that. So, two things. Happy to come up to your patio and have a crew come up there and clean it, dust it off.
But if you don't fix it, it's going to come back.
Yeah, so that's the thing. So right now I'm working with the HOA on determining timing when we're going to come. Well, let me say, working with the HOA, they would like us to come out and pressure wash the lower levels and potentially anybody's patio that has had this residue buildup. And we're working with them on scheduling that. And so what that would look like is notification would go out saying, hey, we're going to be in the neighborhood. We're going to be pressure washing. We have a crew that comes out. They would pressure wash. From our observations, the lower half, and this is Mike Burrows. For those that don't know, the HOA hired a construction consultant to be a liaison between our contractor and our construction crew and the HOA to kind of explain construction to them and explain what needs to be done and to get approval to do certain things. So what he's determined is it looks like the lower level needs to be pressure washes, which for the most part is garages and people's front doors. And so we're going to do that. And then in addition to that, if you want to have your patio pressure washed, I will work with people individually. But again, like you said, until we're done with the work, we'd come out every day, right? So,
Right.
but
Can't you do that like next week first and foremost? Because it's ruining my whole home.
Yeah.
I've got mud, dirt, tar.
So the question, I just want to be clear so Mike can answer this. The question is, can we get somebody out there with a sense of
tarp or
urgency to clean up the patio in the interim until the larger soil,
Didn't they put a tarp on that soil or something? It's just,
I'm going to have Emily talk about what the schedule is for what we call grasscrete. You know, the stuff that's there before it was like the concrete with the grass in between. We're going to be replacing that. So let me have Emily talk about that. But there is some digging, and you may have received a phone call about it today. There is some digging that's going to come up. So maybe, Leslie, we could talk after this and figure out a time next week where I do have to contract with a contractor. I just can't call somebody. We have to fill out forms and everything. But I do have a company, and I'd be happy to send them up to wash off your patio.
Right.
But I think the timing, and I was talking to Nancy about this because Nancy and the HOA want to have the driveways as you enter your garage. There's that black asphalt residue. We're going to have that
that's all
pressure
over
washed as well, but it's a timing, right? We don't want to come out, pressure wash it, and then we relay all the asphalt, or we're continuing to work, and then it just shows up again. So it is a timing thing, but I want to assure you that we will do it. But if there's something that's a little more urgent for you, I'm happy to take care of it as a
I
one-off.
think
But I
what
do have to
Leslie
contract
wants
it.
is something in the interim to get rid of the problem right now and then the longer fix. So maybe what you need to do is follow up with her after the meeting, go visit her property, get that patio
you know
clean.
where it is, don't you? The
Got it.
patio. It's
Okay.
the walk.
Can we
it's
talk
the-
afterwards? Because I'm going to be there
Yeah.
tomorrow at 11:30 with that sub
It's
talking
the
about it.
main thing, where I've got semi-trucks on my patio, on
Yeah,
my
yeah.
sidewalk. I've been through a lot. It's been
Yeah.
like 6 weeks of constant.
You're in a high impact area.
I know.
Leslie. I
it
can't.
is.
Yeah,
It's
I
not
can't
fair.
deny-
I'm
yeah.
sorry. It's driving me bonkers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you
Mike,
like to
I'm
meet
gonna ask
tomorrow?
you
We can
to-
talk about some stuff. Okay. I'll get with you and we'll schedule a time to meet and I'll be there.
Okay.
Okay. Great.
Okay. I think the woman in the sweatshirt, Sarah, if you can pass it back. Leslie, thank you.
Thanks for a great discussion, as always. And I have a question regarding the additional testing and maybe a clarification. I remember from, I think, last meeting you had discussed the fact that during the various testing that we've done, it seemed to me that there was some stabilization, right? There was no more, the vapors were not getting worse, they were actually maybe getting a little less over time. So this additional testing within that context, is it new areas you're testing, or is that areas that were different, right? Again, in that context of it seemed to be very stable, right? And now you're doing additional testing.
And so, in general, the soil vapor plume as a whole, that is generally stable. There is the section that's south, that Belcourt Hill area. That is where there's still that unknown and the additional groundwater sampling that's happening. And that's because in that area, while the soil vapor plume isn't getting bigger and wider or moving, the stability isn't quite what. When I look at one or two of these locations in that area, I do see a slightly increasing trend. It's not huge. It's not, run for the hills. This is super bad. We need to do remediation right now. But it warrants what is this source? And we know it's coming from that impacted groundwater. And so we want to better understand that and address the contaminated groundwater, because once that source goes away, then we'll see that reduction in that soil vapor concentrations in that area, which with all the testing that's been done, we've not seen vapor intrusion within Belcourt Hill, or maybe it's been, actually, yeah, we have not seen, I don't recall, I don't think we've seen any vapor intrusion in Belcourt Hill. And so by addressing the groundwater impacts and allowing the soil vapors to also then decrease, will just continue to be a protective measure in the future. And that's based on what we've got right now, the path forward. But again, as we collect more data, things may change. As buildings age, shift, more cracks in the foundation occur. If we start seeing vapor intrusion, then the path forward will adjust accordingly, which is why there's still that long-term indoor air monitoring that does occur.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody have questions that has not asked us questions yet, that didn't have a turn? Are you sure? We're friendly.
I mean, it's wrapping up, so
No,
kind of a no big deal.
No,
but
we're fine.
is part of this whole safety issue with the trench plates why suddenly you're doing all the slurry seal, which is really a mess? Or were you, because I don't recall that was done before. Like you seal them.
Oh, around the edges.
Yeah.
Partially, yeah. The cold patch. Yeah, it's to help with the safety concerns.
It's messy and gross, and I try and keep my
realize.
dog out of it, and
Yeah.
it gets on the tires in the street, and
Yeah, it's
So-
hard. It's a hard balance we're trying to.
I get it.
Right, yeah.
yes.
But you will have new asphalt in a month, so it will be nice in a month, right? I know it's uncomfortable, though, during that
And all,
time.
all
Yeah.
the trench plates will be gone in a week.
So, okay, other questions? Yes, please, Sarah, over here.
So, when you were talking about the additional groundwater sampling for the area around Belcourt Hill, what is the other area to the north in the yellow circle?
So that is the northern portion of the Newport North Apartments, and what is going on there is those groundwater concentrations aren't as high, but the depth to where groundwater is much shallower. So when that impacted groundwater is off-gassing, there's not as much space for the soil vapor to go to. So we do see higher soil gas concentrations in that area. And while we are not seeing any vapor intrusion at this time, that from the regulatory perspective is not justification enough to not do anything. So we're still looking and collecting some more data, both groundwater and soil vapor, to make sure what occurs and that path forward up there is appropriate.
Okay, any other questions? No? Perry? Perry, you have questions? You are allowed.
Hi, there's something that I brought up a number of times at prior meetings, and it has to do with increased mortality. And I have a very limited sample. I knew one guy who worked at the Ford site where that solvency was. He was a neighbor of ours during that time that Ford was open, and he died of cancer. So I have a sample of one of a guy who died. Now that obviously doesn't make any sense to reach a conclusion based on a sample of one. But what I've asked is, could we go back to Ford and gather some data on the people who did work at that site?
I'm going to ask.
I know that we talk about, based on statistical data, that the probability of mortality, probability of death is very small. But here we have a sample of the people who worked at that site. Could we ask Ford to check with those people and see, of the people who worked there, was there an increased exposure to cancer death?
Well, I will start off, and I'm going to let Amanda address the health risks and all of that. That is a separate, I want to kind of point out that that's a separate thing from the investigation that we're doing, because work at the facility would have been with that direct exposure, and there they are meeting OSHA requirements for handling any chemicals and stuff like that. Now, that being said, Amanda can answer the health component and what does go into it.
And before we get to that, I'm just going to do a quick time check. It's 6:58, so I think we're going to end at this question after you answer, and then I just want to say we'll remain afterwards to answer questions, property specific or just in general. Okay, Amanda.
So yeah, so like Jessica was saying, it's a different question of whether or not the residents are affected by the contamination versus people who worked at Ford are affected by these chemicals. And so it is difficult. I mean, I don't want to say you can't ask Ford because, you know, you could ask Ford if you want. That's maybe I don't need to be involved in that. But it is difficult, just a heads up, to tease out relationships between exposures to chemicals and you know, and the health effects because of all the, you know, variability in the human population, the different things we all do, the different exposures we have. And yeah, and you really need a lot of people. Like 100 people would be a small study. So it is quite difficult to do and to really like show a concrete effect. But the information we do have that strongly suggests that or, you know, has made toxicologists conclude that TCE causes kidney cancer are from industrial exposures. Yeah.
I'm just saying, just ask the question, see if you get an answer. If they can't do it, then that closes the issue.
Okay, noted. All right, I'm going to thank everybody for attending. We certainly appreciate your time, and we will stay after and answer any questions you may have. Thank you.